Hey everyone, I'm Chris Fussell, the president of McChrystal Group. Thanks for joining us today for No Turning Back. Today, myself, Stan McChrystal, have a great discussion with Mayor Pete Buttigieg. Mayor Pete walks us through his views on this moment of leadership and how critical it is as we all go through the COVID-19 pandemic. We then spend time talking about his experiences running for president, leadership on the national stage, how that affected him and his team, and the future of leadership, where this moment is going to take us, both nationally, internationally, and then leadership at the local level. Pete offers great insights, having spent time as a mayor, running a team at that local ground level unit. We really hope you enjoy the discussion, and thanks for joining us. Okay, everyone, thanks for joining us today, having a discussion with Mayor Pete Buttigieg, myself, Chris Fussell, and Stan McChrystal. Our goal on these series is just to continue the discussion around the current state and future of leadership. So speaking with serious and experienced leaders from many different parts of life, from politics to social leaders to business leaders. And so it's really an honor for us to have Mayor Pete joining us here today. Mayor Pete, thanks again for making the time.
Well, sure thing. It's an honor to be with you today. Thanks for having me.
I'm going to try to moderate a little bit, but by all means, let's turn this into a discussion. But starting with you, Mayor Pete, would be curious first and foremost, just your thoughts on how this change, what we're seeing inside the nation, especially, and then globally, how it's impacting leadership, especially from your paradigm, that local mayor level, that is now the critical frontline leader in many ways in this fight.
Well, three things come to mind: the importance of leadership, the importance of government, and the importance of local leadership. Well, I'll start with the importance of leadership. I remember when this president was elected, a lot of people I knew who were from the same political party but didn't didn't think he was going to be a good leader, also comforted themselves by saying it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter that much. It's hard to sink a ship. And one of the things I think we're experiencing right now is a reminder of just how important it is that we have real leadership in our most important positions. A second thing that I think has been clear for some time, but is becoming more and more visible, is the importance of the local. Our federalist system has always been designed for state leaders and local leaders to be able to take the reins, to try different things, to move with a lot of freedom of maneuver. But also right now, we're finding that often the local level is better able to get things done, less crippled by partisanship, I think forced to be responsive to fact in a way that is just more immediate. I always explained it in terms of potholes. When you're a mayor and somebody says there's a hole in the road, you can't say, you can't claim otherwise. You can't throw out alternative facts because everybody can tell. And I think that creates a different kind of orientation at the local level that serves us well at a moment like this, where we're seeing a lot of fact-driven decisions by governors, by mayors from both parties that are really taken without regard to politics. And then the third is the importance of government in general. The fact that there are some things that you cannot expect business or philanthropy to deal with, and that includes things like the massive mobilization this country will have to undertake to be capable of doing the testing we need to reopen safely. To the simple fact that there's just no other resource available to us as a country, as a species, than a well-run government to coordinate some of the large-scale actions and small-scale actions that need to happen without a profit motive and with a view toward getting something done.
Yeah, it's great points, and I'm going to ask Stan if you build on that a little bit, because this I came up in a world of small teams in the SEAL teams, obviously, and just hyper focus at that small level. But to your third point, as I got more senior and the world got more complex, started to really understand the importance of big systems. And it's not intuitive for a lot of folks that we work with to hear people from our background talk about the importance of these large ecosystems, corporate models, government models, et cetera. And Stan, I'm wondering if you want to build on that just a little bit, how important that's becoming.
Yeah, it's the tapestry of the two. As Pete outlined, the reality of the pothole is there. But people who aren't close to it may say, wait a minute, why do I care about potholes somewhere? Well, they break down vehicles, they cost, they slow down transportation, and they affect all of us at some point indirectly. So I think what we've got to get is this, it's a hybrid. It is this hyper understanding and sensitivity to what's happening local, but also communicate across local boundaries so that we see the big picture and we understand where we have to prioritize limited resources, where we've got to allow lessons learned to flow, where we've got to allow our expertise to help each other. And that's what I think a nation like the United States is particularly well set up to do if we'll exercise that muscle.
Pete, I'm curious, are you seeing any sort of uniformity start to evolve at the local level between the many mayor networks that are out there, state, nationally, et cetera, in how sharing of lessons, how they're viewing the problem, what data they should be looking for, and all these next ridgeline problems, school reopenings, et cetera? Is there a common model starting to evolve, or is that still hyper localized?
Maybe not uniformity, but there's certainly some patterns starting to emerge. First of all, mayors are really focused on ensuring that they've got the local players talking to each other. Remember, it's nobody's job officially in a local environment to bring together public health authorities, local government, connections to state and national government, private sector actors to bring it together. And so mayors are improvising. Here in our community, for example, it was decided that the Chamber of Commerce chair would play a kind of quarterback role, not because that's anywhere in his job description or in any local law, but because they wound up having the right combination of relationships between the hospital systems, the universities, the private sector, and the public sector. And so we see a lot of that kind of improvising happening among different mayors. As we look to those ridgeline problems, the one I'm hearing the most about from mayors, and this is pretty consistent even though it takes different shapes in different states, is the simple problem of revenue and resources. A lot of local governments have been already cut down to muscle and bone. They're providing essential services. And when you look at, for example, cities in Ohio that depend on income tax in order to be able to get their revenue, they're staring down the barrel of 20, 30, 40% cuts in a budget where there's no more fat. We're talking about cutting police officers, firefighters, waterworks. I mean, there's nowhere else to look when you get to those levels of cuts. And that's an example of something that is a very local issue that probably can't be solved without some kind of federal action. And it's why there's a lot of interest and attention to what Congress may do next. Because it looks like the local governments and the local players have largely been left out of this last round of negotiations.
Yeah, Stan, if you can maybe make some comments on this observation about, I hope, and I'd like to talk more about some of the lessons, the positives that could come out of this on the backside, although be it through a hard slog ahead. One around this idea of the resiliency that we're learning in an experience like this, that we have to have more interconnected and resilient models. And Mayor Pete, you and I have spoken in the past about the fusion cells. You worked in one during your active duty time overseas, as did I, and Stan McChrystal had built those out in the counterterrorism fight. I believe systems like that, give it whatever name you want, but that interconnected between healthcare, frontline healthcare operators, mayors, local leaders that are in the middle of a fight like this for a disease pandemic or for the next sort of complex network threat, whether it's massive cyber attacks or things that really can outpace the big federal system if we depend on it to do everything. Stan, can you talk a bit about your experiences in fighting network problems and how things like that started to evolve?
Sure. When we first started the counterterrorist fight, as Pete mentioned, there's nobody in charge in many areas to bring different parts of government together. I used to ask the rhetorical question, who's in charge of the war on terror? And people would say, the president is. And I'd say, okay, that's right. Who below him? And the answer was nobody below the president had authority to actually make different parts of the U.S. government work together, much less our allies. So it became a question of bringing everybody together, making them share contextual understanding that we cannot succeed in this unless we succeed in some measure in all of it. It's like in a local area. If your schools are absolutely bankrupt, then the fact that you've got industry isn't going to work because people aren't going to want to live there. No family's going to want to live in that area. There's so many things interrelated that we have got to create a shared consciousness for what matters in a society. And then we've got to understand that if we can't connect the pieces and create general, not perfect, but general solutions to those, operating in our separate silos will be, inherently ineffective.
I just want to mention one thing. I love that phrase, general, not perfect, because I think there is this chase right now for the grand unified answer. And while there's some excellent theoretical work going on and some excellent comprehensive level work estimating, for example, how many tests per day nationwide is it going to take to be open safely, the reality is this is not going to get figured out because a group of researchers or leaders cooked up the solution, and then you go out there and deploy that solution exactly as it was invented on a whiteboard. There's going to be iteration. It's going to be messy. It's going to rely heavily on trial and error, expectations shifting, and so I think we need to be thinking big enough that we have general ideas, general solutions that could be applicable everywhere, and at the same time not let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Mayor Pete, can we pivot off that a little bit to a discussion just around leadership in general? Your views there. You've been through this amazing year, being on the front lines, running for president of the United States. I can't imagine a more tiring thing to try to do day after day for an extended period. And now leaders everywhere are going through this similar. How do we get from sprint to marathon pace to work ourselves through this? Curious. First and foremost, your lessons from that last year, just how it changed your view on leadership, being on the national stage and really trying to change the conversation.
Well, one thing that it did was it really reinforced something that I guess I'd always believed but never fully thought through, which is the importance of trust. When you're doing something as complicated as running for president, you really rely on your horizons being simplified for you because it is simply not possible to keep track of all of the opportunities, all of the risks. It's not even possible to keep track of all of the coverage in major news outlets of a particular remark you made the day before. And so just for deciding which things are going to require you to make a decision, understanding which things demand the most attention, believing that something that you say, that an intention that you form and express to your team will find its way through the leadership of the organization out into the field and ultimately to volunteers or supporters who aren't even on your payroll, but maybe they're at a meeting or on Twitter on your behalf, and it matters that they carry the tone and the principles that you care about. The only way any of that works is a colossal amount of trust. Even just the way you move through your day. Things reach such a pace where I only barely knew some moments what city I was in until I looked up from the briefing I was reading on the airplane or in the vehicle. And to move at that speed really requires a level of belief that the people that you've entrusted with the key functions of organizing your everything from your day to the execution of your mission, that trust makes it all possible. And then you have to reflect on what trust is being placed in you in return, that you're going to make decisions consistent with the values that motivated them to be part of this in the first place, that you're going to try to take care of them just as they're taking care of you. It just the dependency in a way that comes along with being very senior, I think turns upside down some of what we think about leadership, because you really do turn to so many people in order to get anything at all done. I'd say that's the biggest thing that I felt in both the day-to-day and the big picture when it came to running for president.
Can I jump
That's a
on
great
that?
takeaway.
Can I jump on that? Because I watched your campaign with a lot of admiration, and I sometimes ask people, what it is makes a good leader. And people come back with fairly similar lists. But to me, the difference is the self-discipline to actually hold yourself to that on a constant basis. When you're on something like a presidential campaign where it's exhausting, it's almost disorienting, it's got to be at times frustrating. How do you maintain the self-discipline that seems so evident to us who are watching?
We actually had it as a watchword in what we called the rules of the road that I asked, again, not just staff members and myself, but even people who wanted to contribute or volunteer to pay attention to. We called them the rules of the road. And one of them was discipline for exactly this reason. Sometimes especially in leadership literature, a lot of what is suggested, it just seems so numbingly obvious, except in the heat of the moment, right? To actually hold to these. Of course, you should trust your team. Of course, you should set priorities. Of course, you should gather good information. Of course, you should ask questions. But these things are sometimes easily said, but when you're just on the fly, they start to fall away. And that's where I found a couple of things were really important. One, again, was part of that trust was that I also trusted the team would alert me if we were slipping on something. And the other thing, even though we had a pretty well-established structure for our campaign, was actually the role of informal information gathering. The just sort of tilt to the head I might get from somebody who was quite junior in the organization, who might be at an event, or from a supporter, or from my husband, who was probably the person best positioned to deliver ideas or information or observations outside of traditional channels. And that stuff actually adds up in a very important way to, I think, checks on your discipline, because when you're drifting, you need to know that somebody will be able to spot it. And by the same token, you need to be able, even as you have an exquisite level of trust in your top team, to be able to help them see when maybe the organization is starting to drift on some important principle.
Can I build on that? Just to ask a follow-up question. This is one of the things that Stan and I have long conversations about this personally, and then with students that we work with around sort of personal routine. And one of the points we try to make to young up and coming leaders is you've probably got all these strengths, right? You're one of the smarter people in the room, you're incredibly motivated, et cetera. But as your life gets more complex, you're going to have to figure out, how do I maintain my balance? How do I stay mentally fit? How do I maintain some level of peak performance? How do I not go off the rails and get angry at people all the time? Again, back to the pace you've just been through for the last year, how did you do that? What was your routine, whether from morning to night? How did you stay physically fit, et cetera?
Yeah, it became really important to be intentional about these things. And while a routine as such is pretty much impossible on a campaign, we could create what I call a sort of rhythm, which is the next best thing to a routine. Knowing that more than 2 or 3 days wouldn't go by without having insisted that the team find a route and enough time for me to take a long run. Making sure that there were certain things that we could just count on, kind of cycling through from time to time. A little bit of time to read, even if it was just enough to read something that wasn't related to the campaign, just to get your mind firing on, to get those cylinders working. One of the things that I concluded as mayor, and certainly was true as a candidate, was that when you reach that level of intensity in terms of your schedule, actually the best way to decide something is important is to make it a scheduling norm. Even a person. One of the best ways to express your decision that a person is important is to make a norm of committing some of your time and attention to them. And when every minute of your time is programmed, that means communicating that to a staff. I made sure that there was a little bit of time between when the day ended and when I actually went to sleep. Even if it was for something mindless like television, making sure that something went through what was left in my mind before my head hit the pillow. I'll say now I'm in a very different reality where, of course, we don't have the constant motion and travel of the campaign. I would argue routine is maybe more important than ever in this pandemic situation. And some of this might vary depending on personalities and what people are like. But for me, for example, I found it very important to just take some little steps that make weekends different from weekdays in order to have some grasp of the passage of time. And in order to, frankly, make leisure more leisurely as well as work more productive, something that I didn't get to do much during the campaign. Literally, the only way I knew if it was a weekend was that the television programs were a little different when I was drifting off to sleep, or if I was headed to church or a Sunday show, I knew it must be Sunday, but usually only after I'd woken up. an opportunity for me, I think, to discover a little bit about what makes me more productive, and I'm trying to make the most of it.
Stan, can I ask you to build on that? Because I think this question is so important, and a lot of the leaders we're talking with now are trying to figure out this isn't a 3-week problem. What's this going to look like for me and my team for the next 6 months, 12 months, and beyond? How is you've been hyper disciplined in your own rhythm and schedule for years, but how has this affected, and how are you pivoting through it?
Yeah, it's great when I smiled when Pete talked about be intentional, because I even put when I take a shower on my calendar. My wife thinks I'm an idiot, but I literally,
It's a bit extreme.
yeah, I agree. Forces me to do that, but you're exactly right. I have to be very regular about how I do things. I have to work out every day, or mentally I don't do very well. It's almost not related to others. So what I try to do is set myself up a set rhythm. In the morning, I try to work out first thing in the morning. I go through things. I do certain times when I connect. There are times when I find that I let priorities slip. In Afghanistan, we did something when I was the commander that I'd learned from the chairman, and my staff at the beginning of every month would get all my priorities for me. And we'd write down what I'm going to spend 20% of my time on this and 20% on this. And then at the end of the month, they would take my calendar and they would compare what I had said I was going to do and what I did. And I would invariably go, well, I'm going to stop doing that, that, and that. And there were certain things, of course, you couldn't dodge, but it was a great way to go back and sort of check yourself. Am I doing what I really say is important to me?
One thing that I think is really interesting about that is deciding what to cut up your time by. What's your lens going to be? We did a similar exercise in the mayor's office, and some of it was by issue area. How much of the time am I working on the economy? How much of the time am I working on housing? Another way we thought about it that I found very helpful was the balance of internal versus external. When am I with my top team? When am I with people in the organization who are not the people in the organization who get to see me all the time, more junior people? And then when am I with external stakeholders? It was a member of my office who put together a different cut on my time that we hadn't paid much attention to that turned out to be very important, which was geographic. You wouldn't think that you'd pay a lot of attention in the local level to geography the way you might in a line of work that had a lot of travel. But one of the most important dynamics in our city, which experienced a lot of racial segregation and a lot of neglect over the years, was that certain parts of the city felt that they were getting less attention, fewer resources than others. And by mapping the way that my time was spent, we realized that we could be more intentional about where I was going, and even take something that could be held anywhere and be intentional about where it happened. So it got to where our cabinet meetings were almost never held at the office because we knew we could make a choice, have it at an organization or someplace else, make sure that in addition to doing our thing, there was an interaction with the group that was hosting us. So often it's actually the least obvious part of that process of analyzing your time is what's your unit of analysis. And I think you can learn a lot by asking people, okay, how would you break this down? Is it by type? Is it by place? Is it by people? And you can do that in so many different ways. This is speaking my language, and it can definitely be taken to an extreme, and sometimes things have to breathe a little bit. But even then, sometimes it's when you discover that you have a gravity that pulls you to one side from how you think your time ought to be organized. Sometimes that teaches you something about yourself too.
I actually break it in quality as well, because Chris knows me very well from our time in combat together. There are certain hours of the day from Stan McChrystal that aren't worth very much. Later in the day, you can engage with me, and I could do anything stupid. And so I have certain periods when I'm better than others, and I have to sort of mentally allocate and prioritize those as well.
Quality and quantity. That's great.
And I think that's one of the, I'd love to pivot the discussion a little bit towards business leaders specifically, and then one last topic I'd like to hit on around sort of what's next. But I think that's a critical point that we're trying to make consistently with leaders, especially as we're now in this remote, connected environment. Something, Mayor Pete, you had to live in running for office, right? You're talking through a camera to people all the time. That's the new behavior for a lot of leaders as the only medium And we're trying to remind them, you don't have the hallway anymore. So if you have a bad meeting and everyone closes their window, that's the last time you're going to touch them for maybe 3 days. You can't clean that up in the hallway. So really thinking through, how do I time and get myself at peak performance for those moments is going to be critical. I'd be curious, Mayor, your thoughts on sort of the positive outcomes we may see long term from this. I mean, that sometimes can be hard to see in the moment. Obviously, we have a lot of challenges in front of us, but I do think we're learning a certain sense of resilience and grit as a society. I'm just curious what you think may be some of the long term benefits of struggling through this.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be learned. It can feel sometimes a little odd or even improper to talk about a bright side in a terrible situation, but the reality is the bigger a shock, the more consequences there will be, and those can be good as well as bad. Some of the things that I'm seeing that are encouraging, first of all, are a renewed sense of purpose. I'm seeing a lot of folks finding ways to apply themselves to help deal with the situation. Another thing that I think is really important is a different level of awareness on our interdependence and how much we rely on each other and trying to make the most of that. I think we are going to learn more about different methods of interacting and communicating. I think that we'll come out of this with a much more keen awareness of what we can do with tools like video conferencing. But actually, I think the biggest thing we'll learn is how important in certain kinds of in-person interactions are that we didn't think about. I think the hallway is a great example. You know, reflecting on it now, again, I'm thinking about things like my cabinet meeting here. One of the most important functions of that was that it created chance encounters between senior leaders who were peers who didn't always interact with each other. Just seeing the person in charge of the fire department sit next to the person in charge of the police department and having to, just filling in a couple minutes of small talk. There's, oh, by the way, I meant to ask you, or did you notice this? And it helps the kind of collective culture form and problems get solved. And you're right, it also helps you correct for things that happen on the official level in a conversation that really don't get sort of built out or corrected or addressed if there's no other interaction, if there's no other occasion to see and deal with people. So I think we're going to learn a lot about ourselves. We're going to learn a lot about how people, teams, communities, and organizations function. And I think we will come out of this with a greater readiness to pay attention to facts. There's been a lot of talk of us living in a post-fact reality where everything from intelligence assessments to scientific discoveries are being waved away by people in positions of responsibility. I think that'll be a lot harder to do now that we've been brought face to face with the terrible consequences of ignoring science, but also, hopefully, the tremendous virtues and advantages of the inventiveness and discipline of the people who are working right now to offer the technical solutions to this problem, including but not limited to a vaccine.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Stan, what are your thoughts on that? You've been having tons of conversations with senior leaders. Can you describe some of their views right now and sort of the near-term and long-term potential upsides here?
Yeah, I think the one that jumps out, and Pete alluded to it, it's understanding how society actually works. When you stress it and you learn where the supply chains really are, and you notice when we said all non-essential workers go home, and then a good percentage of the essential workers with people who aren't at the top of the income scale. And you suddenly say, oh, wait a minute, who really matters compared to another thing? And we find out that local matters a lot, but in today's world of sort of celebrity-based news, we had this tendency to always look at the top of the mountain, but it's the mass of the mountain that matters. It's how America works or doesn't work. And so I think it's a wake-up call for us as leaders to look at the interdependencies, look at the things that matter most to us, and to focus our efforts to make sure that they are strongest. And it gets to the trust you talk about during your campaign. We trust that there's going to be food in the grocery store. Most of us don't know how the food gets there, but we trust there will be. We're actually not trusting plants or animals. We're trusting a bunch of people who make all this work. And the degree which we can re-educate ourselves on that, I think will be hugely powerful and positive.
Yeah, I just a final sort of closing comment here, and Mayor Pete, go over to you to any reaction to this. And I think one of the hopeful upsides in all this, I have a good friend who's a member of Parliament. We speak a couple times a month, and he told me recently, he said, no one in Europe knew what a mayor did in the United States until 3 months ago. He's like, now your mayors are all over the headlines here in the UK and beyond, and we're really starting to understand how the U.S. governs itself locally, which he saw as a great upside benefit long term. All that to say, I think you've done an amazing example over the last year of just presenting that on the national stage. All of us are better for it, and especially now, it's great to see that local level leader step up and really help those around them in their community. Over to you. Any closing thoughts as we wrap up here?
Well, I appreciate your naming that. Of course, I'm a little biased from my background, but I think it's something that deserves to be deserves a lot more attention. And I think it is a global phenomenon. The ways that cities, even on the most global problems, climate is a good example, where a lot of cities have now reached out to support one another in meeting climate goals because we got tired of waiting on our respective national capitals to catch up. Again, at the same time, that local problem solving is at its most impactful when local leaders are networked well with each other and when there are larger national systems and processes that can put all of that insight to work and support it. So I think a different kind of understanding of federalism, just like a different kind of understanding of our interdependence, could be one of the fruits of this moment. And we're going to need it in order to deal with the other 21st century security challenges. Right alongside global health security, we got cyber security issues, climate security issues that just aren't going to fit into the old boxes. And now's the time to innovate and to expect more of ourselves and each other. So I'm looking forward to remaining in touch about the different insights that we're seeing and the ways I think to apply different kinds of models from across the worlds of business, military, government, and health. Because if there's ever a time to draw threads from across different sectors and different disciplines and different ways of solving problems, we're in it.
Indeed, this certainly is the time for innovation. Mayor Pete Buttigieg, thank you for taking the time to join myself, Stan McChrystal. Good luck to you and your team.
It's a pleasure. Likewise. Thanks very much.
Well, that was a great discussion. Thanks for taking the time. We hope you enjoyed that as much as Stan and I did. Mayor Pete is a leader for current generation and future generations. So we're grateful to him and his team for spending time with us here today. Stay tuned for future episodes of No Turning Back as we work to pull in leaders like Mayor Pete with a view from a broad stage, both politics, business, other spaces. Leadership has never mattered more than it does to us right now. And so we hope you find these conversations helpful to you and your teams. Thank you.